If Benny Goodman was the king of swing, then Fletcher Henderson was the power behind the throne. That's a quote from noted professor and author Jeffrey McGee. Hi, this is Roderick Paulin. Today we're going to be taking a brief look at big band jazz early pioneer Fletcher Henderson Jr. I hope that you come away with a deep appreciation for his musical legacy that spawned the careers of many iconic musicians while at the same time creating a new musical genre. Let's get started. Fletcher Hamilton Henderson Jr. was born James Fletcher Henderson on December 18, 1897 in Cuthbert, Georgia. Wanting a more productive life for himself and his family, Henderson Sr. walked some 200 miles to Atlanta, Georgia from Newberry, South Carolina to further his education by attending Atlanta University, where he was mentored by Edmund A. Ware, then university president, who helped Henderson become principal of the Howard Normal School with the explicit mission to educate blacks after he graduated Atlanta University in 1880. In 1905, the school was renamed the Randolph County Training School and was recognized by both the Georgia State Department of Education and the Atlanta University Press as one of the best black schools in the state for 1932. A well-rounded education was instilled in the Henderson home by having the children to take piano lessons and learning music theory to be fluent in reading music at an early age. As a middle-class black family struggling to prove their worth in a white-dominated society, the piano symbolized respectability during those times. Like his father, Fletcher Henderson Jr. attended the Randolph County Training School, formerly the Howard Normal School, and Atlanta University, earning degrees in chemistry and mathematics in 1920. Atlanta, Georgia, during that time stood as the most progressive community for black communities. The young Henderson changed his name in 1916 when he began his collegiate studies at Atlanta University to Fletcher Hamilton Henderson Jr. as a sign of independence, possibly, as the name change aligned him more strongly with his father. Being trained in music from his youth, Fletcher was active while attending Atlanta University, playing football, baseball, acting in theatrical productions, and he majored in chemistry, of course. He was the university organist and played for the mandatory attendance chapel services. He studied music under Professor Kemper Herreld, a violinist and conductor who stood among the leading black classical musicians of the city. Henderson was the accompanist for all recitals and university special programs while under Herreld's direction. Such programs and recitals afforded Henderson the chance to display his musical training, but social parties allowed him to combine his musical tastes and social interests. While on tour with Ethel Waters for a show in New Orleans in 1922, Henderson encountered a young trumpet player named Louis Armstrong. Henderson was impressed by the way Armstrong played so rhythmically and full of passion. After introducing himself and discussing a job offer with the band, Armstrong declined Henderson's offer because he wanted his drummer Zutty Singleton to come along with him as a package deal. 2 years later, in 1924, when Louis Armstrong arrived in New York City without Zutty Singleton, the beginning of how a soloist reshaped an entire musical genre was taking shape. Now Henderson didn't give Armstrong many solos or features while he was a member of his band. Armstrong was featured as a vocalist as well while with Henderson, an account that author Jeffrey McGee states in his book, Fletcher Henderson and Big Band Jazz, states this account. One passage began triple fortissimo and then suddenly softened down on the next passage to double pianissimo. The score was properly marked PP to indicate the pianissimo. But when everybody else softened down, there was Lewis still blowing as hard as he could. I stopped the band and told him, pretty sharply I guess, that in this band we read the marks as well as the notes. I asked him if he could read the marks, and he said he could. But then I asked him, well, what about PP? Louis Armstrong answered, why, it means pound plenty. That is just one of many examples that made Louis Satchel Armstrong who he was as a person, and his personality came through his music whenever and wherever he was. Author Ted Goyer states further that Armstrong captured the imagination of both jazz devotees and the general public. Armstrong catapulted the Henderson Ensemble from being a dance society orchestra to a jazz band, and he began to transform jazz as a whole to an art form. Pops was reluctant about leaving the band, but he had a newlywed as he was married to pianist Lil Hardin, and she encouraged him to return home to begin his solo career. Fletcher Henderson's successes and failures can be attributed to multiple factors. The mere fact of being a black man in the 1920s and 30s is reason enough to give Henderson consideration for him continuing in pursuing his passion for creating music, creating an entire musical idiom that maybe at first he didn't or couldn't realize what was taking place. On the other hand, accounts show that Henderson's lack of business savvy and his resistance to change are things that can be laid at his feet to explain some opportunities that he wasn't selected for. Even with those things that Fletcher Henderson encountered in his lifetime, at the core of his being was a musician that loved performing. At his funeral on January 2nd, 1953, former band members showed up to pay respects, including Count Basie, Benny Goodman, Don Redman, Andy Kirk, John Hammond. Honorary pallbearers were Red Allen, Dickie Wells, and Garvin Bushu. Henderson's influences saturates film scores from the 1930s and the 40s. Several modern jazz musicians acknowledge and further develop Henderson's legacy. Trombonist J.J. Johnson composition Rambo, recorded by Count Basie's band in 1946. Art Blakey, the drummer whose bombshell beats had so annoyed Horace Henderson, went on to become an influential band leader in his own right, making his Jazz Messengers a school for young, ambitious players, much like Henderson had done with his band. The most devout sideman, Herman Sonny Blount, who served as Henderson's pianist from 1946 to 47, went on to lead his own orchestra under the name of Sun Ra, playing several pieces identified with Henderson. Composer-arranger Gil Evans, who as a California teenager had absorbed Henderson's style through Goodman's broadcast, made a modern jazz arrangement of King Porter's Stump that encapsulates the history, referencing Jelly Roll Morton's original as well to the Henderson's arrangement for clarinetist Benny Goodman. A study of Henderson is a study of frustration. The ease with which big band jazz was subverted and suggests how open an expression Negro music could become. And no Negro need feel ashamed of a rich Jewish clarinetist, says Amari Baraka, author. This condensed synopsis doesn't adequately describe, portray, or honor Fletcher Henderson, nor any of the names that were mentioned as to the contributions to the music of the big band genre that was sometimes taken for granted. A genre that was created and given to the world to enjoy, study, and even contemplate certain aspects of life just as Henderson did. What is encouraging, however, is the vision that Henderson developed through thought, words, attracting great musicians, and love, most importantly, which speaks to what he accomplished during a time that was a somber yet uplifting note to himself and to black people. Nevertheless, through education, discipline, and dedication, Henderson not only survived those times, he's flourished in spite of multiple obstacles. Trumpeter Howard Scott quotes the statement from band leader Paul Whiteman that accurately describes admirers and even some critics regarding Fletcher Hamilton Henderson Jr. If Fletcher Henderson was a white man, he'd be a multimillionaire. Thank you very much. This has been Roderick Pollard.